Welcome back to Solo Adventures! My name is Livy and I'm here today with a print and play game review. Today we're going to be taking a look at a little tiny game with only 9 cards, Mini Rogue. Mini Rogue is a game that was originally designed for the BGG 9-card game design contest. Since then, a deluxe version of the game has had a successful Kickstarter campaign. We're going to take a quick look at how this game plays and just do a basic overview of the rules, but if you're not interested in that, then please feel free to skip to the end to get to my final thoughts. So without any further ado, let's venture forth. So here we are, we're set up for Mini Rogue. The only thing that I'm doing a little bit different from just the base game is instead of using this card for character stats, I am using this card for character stats that you can print out separately from BGG. I just like it better because there's more space to spread out and it doesn't feel quite so cramped. But if you like, of course, you can use just this card and it's a bit more portable. So, getting set up, we need to decide our difficulty. So we're going to play on normal difficulty, and that means that we begin with 5 HP, no armor, 6 food, 0 XP, and we begin on level 1, area 1. So when we get set up, we first remove this boss monster card and set it aside because we will only be using it at the end of a level. And then we just shuffle up these additional 6 cards and lay them out like this. So one column with 1, one column with 2, one column with 1, one column with 2. So the gameplay is pretty simple. Let's get started. So this card is the resting card. When we come across this, we can choose one of these 3 options. So we can reinforce our weapon, which gives us 1 XP. We can search for rations, which would give us +1 food, but we don't need any right now, and in fact we're at maximum. Or we can heal 2 HP. Now we begin with 5 HP, but we can go all the way up to 20 HP. There isn't really a limit here. I think that more health is probably what I want at this point. So now we flip over these 2 cards, and we can decide where we want to go. So I could go to the merchant and buy items, but I don't really have that much gold. I only have 3. So I'm going to go to this treasure space instead. And it says here you get 1 if no monster has been defeated so far, and 2 if you did defeat a monster, and we didn't defeat a monster yet, so it's just 1. And then we also get to roll. So if we get a 5 or a 6, we get an item. 1, no such luck. And here we have a trap, which is my least favorite card because nothing good ever comes of this. So we're going to first have to make a skill check to see if we can avoid this trap, and it's very unlikely that we're going to pass because we are only rank 1. Now we can rank all the way up to rank 4, and the rank that we are determines how many dice that we roll for attacks and for skill checks. So since we are only rank 1, our skill check means that we have to roll a 1 to bypass this trap. And not lucky, so we fall in the trap. Let's find out which trap it is. 3. Acid Mist, so it destroys 1 of our armor. We don't have any armor, so I guess that's no big deal. Alright, so now we can choose, do we want to fight a monster and potentially get some XP, or do we want to roll for an event? I don't really feel like fighting right now, so let's roll for an event. And we also get to roll for a skill check. So if we pass the skill check, we'll be able to modify our next roll by 1, either up or down. So rolled 6, no such luck. And so now we just have to roll, and whatever we get is what we have to deal with. 1. So we get +1 food ration. We're already at max, so that doesn't do anything for us. But we are at the end of the first area. So we descend into the next area. We move this little marker over from area 1 to area 2. And every time we descend, we spend 1 food. So now I'm down to 5. So we gather up our 6 cards again. And we shuffle them. And lay them out like so. This time though, we know that we have a boss monster waiting for us at the end of this level. And we are unlucky. Our first area is a trap. Oh, rolled a skill check, got a 2, that wasn't quite enough. So we landed again into an acid mist trap, but I don't have any armor, so that's okay. Let's see, we can fight a monster or we can do some resting actions. Well, I do want more XP because I want to rank up, but as you can see here, since we are on level 1, the monster that we have to fight will give us only 1 XP if we beat it. And one of our resting actions is to reinforce our weapon for 1 XP, so I would rather just give myself 1 XP without having to worry about risking any hit points. Okay, get 1 gold because we didn't fight any monsters yet. And let's see if we get an item. No. Okay, we can go shopping or we can roll for an event. Well, I only have 5 gold and I kind of want to save up for more armor because that will help us reduce damage later on, so I'm going to roll for an event. I'm just going to roll them at the same time. Pink is my skill check and black is the event result. Nope, and the event result is a monster, so yeah, we got the only, I guess, kind of bad result on the event table here. So we have a monster, and we calculate its HP by the area that we're in, which is in this case 2, and then we roll 1d6. So 6 plus 1 is 7 HP for this monster. So we mark that here. And now let's get into combat. So it's pretty simple. I'm rank 1, I roll 1 die when I attack this monster. 2, that is not fabulous. So the monster is down to 5 hit points. The damage that this monster does is equal to the level times 2. So since we are at level 1, he will do 2 damage to me. And that just means that since I have no armor to reduce the damage, I just take the full 2 points, and I'm down to 5 hit points. 4. Still has 1 HP, and I lose 2 hit points. And 4, I win. I'm pretty damaged here, so I don't know if I'm going to survive this boss. But here I at least have 2 XP, moving a little closer to rank 2. So here we are at the boss monster. And since we are at level 1, we see here on the table, level 1 is the undead giant that we have to fight. It has 10 HP. And I always get to attack first, which is, I guess, the only good thing about this, because I'm not so sure we're going to survive. Let's do our best. 1. This is terrible, because if you roll a 1, then you just don't even get to use this roll for an attack, you just remove it. If I had rolled a 6, however, I would be allowed to roll again and add that result to the 6. So in this case, this case I would be double bad luck though, because if you have a 6 and if you roll the die again and you end up with a 1, then it negates your 6 and you can't use it at all. But otherwise you could add the second result to the first one. Okay, yeah, so I failed at attacking this monster, and he does 3 damage to me, and I only have 3 HP and no armor, so I'm down to 0. And I have already lost Mini Rogue on the first level. But yeah, even though I have reached an untimely death, I think that I've already shown you pretty much everything that this game has, except for maybe the spells. So sometimes when you get to roll for an item, you can get a spell. So for example, if we had been able to beat this undead giant, we could have rolled for an item. So it says 2 gold, 2 XP, 1 item. We would roll. In this case, we would have a 3, which would give us the Fireball spell. So we can only have a maximum of 2 spells at a time, and if we want, we can have 2 of the same spell. But when we have a Fireball spell, that allows us to add +8 to any of our attack rolls, so that's very useful. If we had an ice spell, then we'd be able to freeze a monster or a boss for 1 whole turn, and they wouldn't get to counterattack at any time there. And if I had poison, I would be able to do an additional 5 damage per round until the end of the combat. And if I had heal, then when I cast this spell, I just gain back 8 hit points. So I think this gives you a good idea of how to play this game. I might do a full playthrough later in another video if people would like to see that, but otherwise, let's get into our final thoughts. So I think the first and most obvious thing that will strike you when you take a look at Mini Rogue is just how teeny it is. Most so-called pocket-sized games are not really pocket-sized for me because, like most women, the pockets of my jeans are woefully undersized, but I think that I actually could fit this into my pocket. Might be a little bit of a tight fit. Maybe I would put the components in one pocket and the cards in the other, but yeah, this is super portable. Since this game is so little, the build is amazingly fast. I only needed to print out 1 double-sided sheet for all of these cards. And then when it comes to the components, all you're really going to need is 9 little tokens, a pawn to mark your character if you like, and then 4 dice, though I would recommend to have 5. If you're brand new to PnP, then I might suggest Mini Rogue as your first build, for no other reason but that it's just so small and easy to put together. When it comes to the art style, the art is rather simplistic and pretty basic, but I do really kind of like the simplicity of these clean lines and these nice sharp colors. There are no complaints from me on the way that this game looks. Alright, so let's get into what I liked about this game. So as I said before, Mini Rogue was a game that was designed as an entrant to the 9-card game design contest that's on BGG a couple years back. And so the designer of this game has had to work within the rather strict parameters and the rules surrounding this game design contest. For the 9-card contest, there can obviously only be 9 cards, but you are also not allowed to use any paper or pencil or use any kind of writing implements anywhere with your game, and you can only have a maximum of 18 components. And of these components, you're only allowed to use extremely basic stuff like D6s and meeples and small plastic discs. Just things that most gamers would have lying around, I guess. Keeping in mind these extremely strict rules around the designing of this game, I think that this game manages to do quite a lot with the very little that it was allowed to have. 2 of the cards from this game are used to track your health and where you are in the dungeon, and another card in this game is used for the boss monster, so there are effectively only 6 cards that you shuffle and place every time you explore a different area in this game. Each and every round you will see all of the cards, the only question is what order will they be in. Despite this fact, this game really doesn't feel as repetitive as you might expect. Sure, you do see all of the cards practically all of the time, but the decisions that you have to make with them are at least somewhat interesting. There isn't a ton of room for strategy here, but you can decide on whether you'd rather focus on trying to get your XP up as high as possible so that you can rank up and roll as many dice as possible, or if you would rather try to buff your character and just heal as much HP as possible, or just get as much armor as possible and try to tank your way through this dungeon. Something that I think is great about this game is just how simple it is. I feel like most people could learn how to play this game in just a couple of minutes, and you don't really need to reference the rules very often because all of the pertinent information is really just here on the cards. Something that I also think is great about Mini Rogue is its short playing time. Playing time can be really variable depending on how long you can survive, and in some cases the game is quite short because you die very quickly, but I have never had a game of Mini Rogue last me longer than half an hour. Since the game is so short and so tiny and so quick to set up, it's really not a big deal to just play a quick round. I think the best part about Mini Rogue is just how well this game has managed to condense the quintessential roguelike dungeon crawler into such a tiny little package. I mean, there's XP that you gain and you level up, there's treasure to collect, there's monsters to fight, and the challenge ramps up the deeper down you get into the dungeon. There are aspects of this game that can be highly dependent on luck, depending of course on how well you roll the dice and which cards pop up. But I think a little bit of randomness and unpredictability is something that most really good dungeon crawlers just seem to have. Something that I also like about this game is that it can be pretty hard. As you saw before, I lost very quickly just playing on normal difficulty, and this isn't really too unusual. I find a lot of my runs in Mini Rogue end rather quickly. There are 4 different levels of difficulty, so you can really tailor the challenge to what you're feeling up to. Something that I think is super nifty is that there is a score sheet that you can use to calculate your score. So not only can you try to beat this game on different difficulty levels, you can compare your scores from play to play. You get extra victory points at the end of the game depending on how much leftover gold, health, and food that you have. So really nothing that you have in your inventory is really going to waste when it comes to boosting your score at the end of the game. So now that I've gone over the positives, let's just touch on some of the things I wasn't super keen on with this game. I think by far the biggest flaw and problem with this game comes from exactly what it is that makes it special, and that's it's just so small. With only 9 cards, there really isn't a ton of variability that you can have here. The whole game just feels really cramped. Since there are so few cards and you need to shuffle them up and deal them out for every area, you have to shuffle these 6 cards so many times. Honestly, getting through a single area in a level can take just a minute or so, so you feel like you're constantly shuffling these cards and setting them back up. Honestly, it gets a little bit tedious. I think it would have felt a lot better if the deck was just bigger, so I didn't have to shuffle every time. I could just deal out another 6, but that would fundamentally change the design of this game. While it is true that I personally think that the length of the game is just right and that it doesn't get too overly repetitive over the course of a single play, I've never found myself wanting to play this game twice in a row. After I've made it to the end, I'm always just kind of like, yeah, that's enough. I don't really need to play this game anymore, because I think that a second playthrough right after that would be just too much of the same thing again. I think that there's also some issue with the balance for the difficulty with this game. In some runs you die very quickly and it can feel a little bit like you couldn't have avoided it that much if you were just really unlucky. But other times, if you manage to survive through the first couple of levels and you build a little stockpile of HP and you've got some items and some armor, it can almost feel like the monsters are a little bit trivial as you go. And sometimes it can just feel downright too easy. The first level or so that you play are almost always pretty deadly and difficult feeling, but the difficulty of the later game really depends on how lucky you were and how well you played your first couple levels. While there are different difficulty levels for this game, the only difference between the different difficulties is how much armor, how much food, how much hit points, and how much gold you start with at the beginning of the game. And that's it. The monsters don't necessarily hit any harder, you don't necessarily gain any less XP, just your beginning stats. That's the only thing that changes in the different difficulties. So because of this, if you're playing on a harder difficulty, the beginning levels will indeed feel even harder and even more deadly, but if you're lucky, the game over time will eventually kind of even out. And even playing a game on really hard mode can feel quite similar to playing on casual mode near the end of the game. Okay, so my final verdict on this game leaves me feeling a little bit conflicted, because overall I would say that I did in fact have fun with Mini Rogue. I do think that it's a pretty fun game. For as much fun as this game can be at times, it is ultimately a rather shallow game. I think that it's hard to make an extremely deep game that has only 9 cards. So I don't really think it's the fault of the designer, it's really just kind of a side effect from the constraints that were put on the designing of this game. All in all, I would say that Mini Rogue it's fine. It's on the better side of average, in my opinion. The gameplay is not going to blow you away, but the fact that so much content can be crammed into such a tiny package is really kind of fascinating. There isn't a lot of depth, but you can actually work a little bit of strategy into this. So, should you play this game? Well, I guess I'm not really sure. It would really depend on the person. Mini Rogue isn't a game that I'm raving about, and I'm going to tell everybody that they just need to try. But if you're really curious about how a 9 card game could be an effective dungeon crawl, it won't really take you too much time or material to just make yourself a copy of this game and give it a try once or twice. The good news, though, is that there was a successful Kickstarter for the deluxe version, and there will be more than twice the number of cards in that version. I know that I backed it, and I'm actually pretty excited looking forward to this new edition. My expectations are not super high, but I am interested to see what a few more cards can do to mix up the way this game plays. Thank you so much for watching. I would appreciate it so much if you would subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you are interested in helping support me and the work that I do, you can check out my Patreon. My patrons vote to choose most of the topics that I use for making my videos, and so, for example, if you'd like to see me do more 4 Against Darkness or more gamebooks, well, just keep in mind that my patrons do have influence over what I make on this channel. I want to thank all my patrons for making this channel possible, but an extra big thanks goes to my heroic tier patron, Joshua Jumbles. So until next time, friends, stay adventurous.